afternoon, everybody. And Thebe, thank you for invigorating us. And I think also thank you for making us a bit uncomfortable about seeing ourselves and how we are seen by the world. I think when you see yourself in pictures, it becomes all the more real. Jollof eating, Africa traveling, marketer par excellence. I'd like to almost bring the conversation now that you've triggered to how do we take it all forward in place branding or nation branding? And particularly to ask, as a kickoff, is it really important for African countries to participate in what is known as place branding, and why?
Good question. I think we have always, I think we like putting labels to things, because now we call them place branding, competitive identity, nation branding, and all those things. We always have, I ended with a slide that says you must identify with Africa, then you'll have an identity. But similarly, if you identify with your country, then you have an identity, because it's important to know who you are. And the concept of nation branding is really about understanding two parts. Two things. First is understand who you are, what makes you different, and to use that difference, that distinction, to compete. That's what you need to do. And a lot of what we're trying to do now is we are trying too hard as Africans to assimilate. We are trying too hard to be like Europe or like other countries. So even within Africa, if you speak to the people from Uganda, from Kenya, from South Africa, they're all going to tell you they've got the big five. They're all going to tell you the same stories. You speak to the people, like I said, West Africa, they all make the best jollof, or they all make the best bisap. So nobody says, what makes me different and distinctive? What can I leverage, and how can I leverage this to compete in the world? When you think about America, for example, you say, oh, America, that's entrepreneurship.
The land of dreams.
The land of dreams. Yeah. If you think about England, you say it's a place of traditions.
Absolutely.
And if you think about Brazil, you say, oh, the land of samba. Yeah. So we need to understand yourself beyond just being African, because being African on itself is not a currency. So a lot of us, think we can trade on the name Africa. That's not a currency on its own.
But now we have this double whammy. So you showed in one of your slides the flag of Zimbabwe and how perceptions of Zimbabwe by Zimbabweans themselves, by Africans ourselves, by the external world are then translated into what Africa is seen as. Then we have to layer on that how we've organized ourselves for economic integration, for travel and movement around the continent. So we've got COMESA, we've got SADC. And we do it, to be quite honest, for the benefit of the first world, so that they can actually recognize us, that, oh, they are in a SADC state, or they are part of COMESA. So it's not really to our advantage. So my question then, Ben, is how do we pull away from that? How does a country pull away from that quagmire where we are seen with one stroke? So that's the first part of the question. And then secondly, for those countries that have been able to successfully pull away, is it an obligation or a duty for them to take others along? Because at the end of the day, nation branding is about competitiveness. Do you want to go out and share with other countries that which you have become extremely competitive at, and that brings you that much needed and tourism investment, foreign direct investment, and those kind of things?
There's probably one president alive today in the whole wide world who is probably the best at what he does, Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump, as has been described many times, campaigned on misogyny, campaigned on racism, campaigned on putting America first, and he came into power to do just that. So what we're seeing in the world of America today, we are seeing somebody who understands the direction he wants to take his country, and is steadfast on doing that.
Irrespective of whether we like it
Irrespective of whether we like it or don't like it. If there is a lesson I think, and in many ways, to an extent, in Rwanda, President Kagame has, President Kagame, into extent, he says, you know what? We are going to run Rwanda on Rwandan terms. We are not going to try and explain ourselves to the rest of the world. So although these are two different types of presidents, what we are learning, what one should learn from both of them, is how important it is to understand, I said earlier, who you are, but most importantly, understand the trajectory you want to take your country. And you need to focus on that. If there's anything Donald Trump has taught us, if there's anything, or has reminded us, that the success of any nation, or the success of Africa, perhaps in many ways, is going to lie in Africa thinking inward. So we need to do the things which are uncomfortable. And the most uncomfortable thing we are going to need to do is what Trump has done: protectionism. We need to think inwardly, because when you think inwardly, you are going to burn with creativity. You are going to be able to create. There's a good example: South Africa during apartheid.
Sure.
So South Africa during apartheid was a pariah state. Nobody wanted to do business with South Africa. Nobody wanted to engage with South Africa. So what did the former colonial rulers do? They looked internally. They closed the borders, and out of that, they created Old Mutual. They created many other successful Pan-African and global brands like Sasol out of South Africa, and created an economy which today is but 50-60% of the continent's GDP. So there is a lesson there that if you do look internally, you will be forced to create. The problem with us Africans is because we look so much externally, is we then abdicate the responsibility to create to others for ourselves. So yes, so to me, to answer your question, we need to look internal. So we need to look to ourselves for the solutions of how we're going to move this continent forward. Yes, the second question relates to what about those countries, South Africa, Kenya,
that have succeeded,
Nigeria,
or some way,
who are succeeding in some way.
In some way,
do they have a responsibility to bring others up? We've got the responsibility to share best ideas.
Right.
We've got the responsibility to lift each other, because in African culture, in African community, as you rise, you must lift. But that does not mean you must do the same mistakes that colonialism did. Sure. It means you don't create dependency, because you know what dependency have done. So there's a challenge, a criticism about South Africa, for example, is that a lot of times we tend to be a bit colonial in how we do things. We arrive in the country.
And we want to take over.
And Andy spoke about it earlier, that we'll arrive in a country and we want to impose how things should be done. So your job is not to impose. When people ask me, how do you travel so effortlessly everywhere? I say, simple. I leave South Africa at the airport every time I leave the country. Similarly, that's how you build your brand. Do not bring your country's problems and issues and way of doing things to other people's countries. But because we are all Africans, do lend a helping hand and say, I can guide you in terms of, I can share with you how we traveled our journey, but you need to travel your own journey, your own way.
So very interesting that you say there's a lot to learn in the promises that Donald Trump made to the American people, but also what I find quite particularly interesting about him is the ability to deliver against those promises ever so effectively. On a day-to-day basis. And perhaps that's one thing that that kind of resolve is what is really needed by us as Africans. We're sitting here in a room, not as full as I think we would have liked it to be. And also we have issues of, do South Africans go into other countries and impose themselves on other nations in the on the continent and all this sort of thing. So one has to ask ourselves then, is the issue us, perhaps? Is the issue ourselves in this? Do we have somewhere in us this inertia to move from having conversations, because we've been having conversations, to taking very uncomfortable decisions that are going to propel our countries forward? And when we do, Thebe, and perhaps because you've traveled the continent so extensively and so often, have you seen where that resolve has worked, but also has it been impactful in the lived realities of the citizens of those countries? Because we do all we do, we brand, we do nation branding, we do place branding, but actually is it felt by the people of those countries to whom the countries belong?
Let me address that, not because I'm here, but being here is a reminder of just that question. That how a nation just 25 years ago was, for all intents and purposes, obliterated. And how the resolve of the leadership to reimagine what a country can be, what this country can be, has resulted in a country which is among the fastest growing economies, I said the cleanest. You walk around here and you see infrastructure going up every day. You walk around to what we would call slums. They don't have such things. Yeah. They don't have such, yes, there's poor people and there's rich people, as there are through all society. But it is not undignified poverty as you see, as you see everywhere. So of course there's an example of a country that's been able to reimagine that. And for a small period in South Africa's time, if you remember when Mandela came out of jail, for a small period, for 10 years or so, we set the example of what it's like to be able to move forward as a country. Leadership is very important. I think it's Napoleon Bonaparte who said, a leader is a dealer in hope. So because what a leader does, he embodies the ambitions, the hopes, the dreams of the people. And the leaders who do well are those who are able to consistently do that and deliver that. You ask the question, where does the problem lie? The problem lies in this room. We Africans are our biggest problem. We Africans are our biggest obstacle. We Africans are the reasons Africa is not moving forward. We need to identify with this continent. We need to understand who we are. We need to understand the game plan. We need to say, if this is going to be, it should be up to us, because we are the ones we've been waiting for.
I'd like to thank you, Thebe. And you know, I think for me, what you've just said rings so very true, because and taking nothing away from the powerful and very influential speakers we're going to have access to in the next 2.5 days. But I can imagine that had it been a keynote speaker from some European country, this room would have been full. So perhaps it is us that we need to look at and say, how do we want to participate and respond to these conversations about changing the narrative or infusing new narratives in how our continent is seen if we ourselves don't show up? Because really it's about showing up. And I'd like to bring it to the audience and perhaps ask a few people, if any people if they'd like to ask Thebe or myself a question. We're almost taking what Thebe was sharing with us earlier on and centering it in terms of how countries and nations can really benefit from some of the things that Thebe had mentioned around identity, around culture, around owning our own intellectual property. We have people who are marketers and communicators in public service, who are in the private sector, who are in FMCGs, who are here with us. So if you have any questions, please raise a hand so that this becomes a little bit more interactive and we're not sitting here talking at you as if we have nothing to hear from you or to learn from you as the day progresses. There's a question there.
Okay. Good afternoon. Okay. Thank you very much for your kind words. My name is Eine Apollos. I am from Nigeria, Aba to be precise. Before you came on, I was discussing with her. I'm sorry if what I'm going to say will offend some persons. We're talking about speaking for Africa here. The first panel that sat, I have a picture of them, and I was trying to make an upload. I said, I can't send this as speaking for Africa. We come from different parts of Africa. We have the way we look, and you made mention of that. I would have thought that coming to this event, we should all have looked like real Africans coming from different backgrounds. And we all have good suits made from other parts of the world. But for me, I choose to come here with this my beautiful dress made in Aba. And I'm so proud of it. And I would have also wished that. So like I said, it would be difficult tweeting those photographs of the first panel because they are not looking Africa, and they're also not speaking Africa with their attire. So I think one of the best and most effective way we can speak for Africa is the way we appear, the way we dress. Thank you very much.
Wendy?
Thank you for that comment. I'm hoping I understood it well, that speaking for Africa and having a voice around ourselves, how we look is also a critical factor and a significant factor in how those conversations are received, by us, but also by other people. So it becomes critically important that we also carry our Africanness in how we present ourselves, because that's how the world first gets to experience us. I see there's a few my hands up in the audience. All right, I'll take another, probably these two hands, this question now, and then the two hands, and then, okay, I'll include you as well. If you can make your question and or comment as short and succinct as possible, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is, I'm here.
I can see you.
My name is Manalisha. I'm Kenyan, and Swahili was my first language, actually, not English. And I work for the Coca-Cola company in Africa. So my question is to you, Thebe. I completely agree with your narrative on changing, changing the narrative for Africa. But my question is more around our approach to it. It seemed like the approach you were sharing was more Africa against the world. And therefore, I actually question that approach, because I'm not sure as Africa we want to stay only within Africa. Just like we import products and goods from other countries, we'd also like to do the same at some point. We'd like to, export Kenyan coffee to the rest of the world. But with this sort of an approach, won't we be injuring ourselves, or wouldn't we be at a disadvantage by using this approach? Shouldn't we rather use the approach of trying to collaborate with the rest of the world, and trying to sell and change our Africa narrative and trying to get them to see us in a certain way? I mean, and I speak personally, not on behalf of Coca-Cola, but the information I have is for Coca-Cola. We employ more than 70,000 people across Africa. If you look at some of our initiatives when it comes to women and developing women, our Safe Birth initiative in Nigeria, our RAIN project for water. There's a lot we do to develop communities. Are we saying that, like some of the brands you showcased are not African enough, even though they've been here for years?
Oh, I've never said that. I've never said that at all. I
love it when it gets here.
And I thought I was so clear, because I said, and by the way, to compete, you have to go against somebody. Just as a start, to compete. But I never said what you said. What I've said was quite simple, and I will recap it. I said there's unfair competition. I said it is not correct for people to come extract products out of Africa for less than an equitable fair share for Africa. I've said that, because if I said that we cannot share with the world, I would have said Africa must not export the coffee from Ethiopia to Starbucks. I didn't say so. I said when Starbucks come here, they must pay a fair price. So as a start. The second thing is I said 6% of the brands that Africans admire are non-African. That's unfair competition, because good competition is Africans should have an equal play at building brands and at building brands that can compete against global brands. I've said that as an African, there must be something fundamentally wrong with me if I reject myself at that level. And I'm just reducing it to a brand level now. If I reject myself so much that I cannot identify with products, with services, with goods that are made in Africa and see them as inferior. And that's why I say the problem with Africa is with Africans, because we are the ones who've got this inferior complex. We understand how we got here, but we are no longer there. But we shouldn't be there for so long. We need to rebrand ourselves. So I have no problems with global brands. I mean, I'm about as global as you can get. I mean, I work for the global brands. I work for Colgate in New York and Coke and Nike for the continent. So I understand global brands. But I also work for African brands. So it's important as an African to champion excellence out of Africa and to share that excellence, or to compete with that excellence in the world. To me, that is actually, if there is anything to remember, it's just that, as it is, we need to champion excellence out of here. Not African excellence, excellence out of here.
And I think to add on to Thebe, I think the inferiority complex that we've had as Africans has been so deep-rooted and so long. So it has breadth and it has this width. I think it is important that at some point we do become a little bit draconian about how we support African brands. Because if we're not going to do that, we're never going to reach a turning point where we understand the value of being African and understand how we attach that value in how we do things excellently. So I think at some point, we're going to have to take some draconian moves. And if at this point it means that we significantly choose African brands, then so be it. Because it is about reigniting the belief in ourselves, which becomes critically important at this time, understanding that as we do that, we need to be able to compete in the world. So I think there is a point where, for us to make the sacrifices that we need to do, there's going to be a lot of pain that goes with it and different choices that we make.
Yes. And I think if there's, I should have made the example, but I didn't put it up, I changed it. If you look at a brand like Samsung, which is the #1 telecoms across the continent. When I had coffee with the CEO of Samsung for Africa, and I asked him a very simple question. I said to him, why are you so successful in the continent against Nokia? You took Nokia out of business. You are challenging Apple in Africa. You're #1. He said to me, very simple, Thebe. He said, I have been to every country in the continent. I've seen how they trade. I've spoken to them. I've eaten with them. I have reflected. And when we came back, we created our Build for Africa initiative. And that initiative says, it's founded on 2 pillars. One, that we are going to create products that respond to the needs and conditions of Africa. But on one hand, those products must be of a global standard and can stand anywhere else. The same that an M-Pesa, which is an African solution, does. So it is really about understanding that as a global brand, for you to thrive or even survive in Africa, you need to meet the standards of Africa. You need to deliver to, yes, global standards, but most importantly, to respond to the needs and conditions. And for an African brand, and African brands need to compete at that level. So if in African, in Nigeria now they've got a cola drink, I forget the name now, which is clapping Coca-Cola. I mean, it's giving Coca-Cola a run for their money in Nigeria. I'm sure the Coca-Cola people know that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good competition. Competition is welcome in Africa. It just must be fair. And as governments, and what we require from African governments is African governments must enable and empower African entrepreneurs and businesses to compete fairly. And if part of what they need to do in the short term is how Donald Trump has thought about it, protectionism, we go hell and do that. If part of how they do it is do what the Chinese have done, which is about building borders around. You know what the Chinese did? They said Facebook, Google, Twitter, don't come to our country until we have settled our own stuff. And then when they finish with Alibaba and all those things, they're like, please come back in and compete with us now. And they couldn't compete because the locals had created world-class brands that compete.
Thanks, Thebe. I'll take a question here. I think there's 2 more. One, no, guys, no. I'm sorry, okay. I'm going to have to take literally just 2 more. Otherwise, we're going to be running out of time. So there's 1 here, and there's 2 that side that I remember. Over to you, sir.
Okay. My name is Ahmed Meki. I'm from Nigeria. I think starting off from the presentation, the keynote address, as Africans, I think we need to do more in changing the narrative. I'm so pleased, I was very pleased with what you said about encouraging brands in Africa, the Dangotes and all the rest. But unfortunately, this venue is not even branded by any of the brands from Africa. whether we like it or not, Coca-Cola is not an African brand. We must encourage brands in Africa to support events like this. At this point, I urge that we put our hands together for the organizers of this event. This is really a great idea. Of course, it is the first, so we must accept some of the shortcomings. I am sure it will get better with time. This is setting agenda for this region, and we must do everything to support the organizers of this event. Wendy said something about if we had a speaker from Asia or from any part of the world, I'm sure this hall is going to be filled. But not just even the speaker. Look at the hall, we still have empty seats because those of us who are in the communication and branding sector are not doing enough to be part of the changing narrative. So beyond just asking people to see us differently, we have to make conscious effort for us to be seen differently, for others to appreciate what we have and what we are offering the world. I think subsequently we need to do more in ensuring that events such as this, African businesses like Dangote, like MTN, like all the African brands, do so much to support this kind of event, because if the narrative changes about Africa, it's going to be, increase the flow of business in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Wendy, I'm not sure we have luxury of time because we actually need to go on a quick tea break. So
I think it's lunch, isn't it?
we need to go on a quick break.
So is that the last question that we're taking, are you saying?
I'm afraid it might have to be.
I have to apologize profusely to the two hands that were up on the right-hand side of the room. We have another 2.5 days where I think a lot of these topics are going to come up again, and you'll have an opportunity to still ask your questions. My last question to Thebe, if I may. I've always found this to be so interesting. There's a saying that says that when America catches a cold, the whole world sneezes. Will we ever get there? Or will we ever have that influence? Or perhaps maybe the other part of the question is, do we already have it and we just don't know it?
We already have it, we just don't know it. We have the power. Do not forget, the cocoa that makes the chocolates in the world comes from here, this continent. Do not forget, the diamonds, the gold, and the steel comes from here. The challenge that we have is we do not realize the power we have within this continent. We have abdicated that power. The day we find who we are and recognize who we are, when we cough, the whole world will catch a cough.
With those words, thank you, Thebe. Thank you very much.